Okay, welcome to session 17, part C. Okay, in this session and the next, I'm going to do some of the questions at the back of the book. So, first, let me explain. Okay, so in this session, and in this part C, here's the problems I'm going to do. Here's the ones that I think are most interesting and ones that could possibly show up on an exam. So remember, we're in chapter 11. So this is 3A, 3B, 8A, 8B, and 10B. Okay, I'm going to do those three problems for part C. Then in part D, I'm going to do some others. I'm going to do question 11, question 15, and question 19. Okay. So I encourage you to pause the video right now, see if you can do those questions on your own, and then I will tell you the answers that I would like to see if this were on an exam. Okay, assume that you're back after pausing. First one, question 3. Okay. In what general systematic way do the interests pursued by officials in government differ from the interests pursued by people in the private sector? Consider the following cases. Okay. No, I just read 2. I'm sorry. Wait. Question 3. I'm sorry. In the following examples, what are the significant differences between government-owned and non-government-owned enterprises? Okay. Why do you think the government owns the enterprise mentioned? What differences, what different forms does competition make in the case of government-owned enterprises? In what different ways do they operate because of their government ownership? Okay, number 3. Okay, number 3. Investor-owned utilities owned by the states versus utilities owned by the states or municipalities. Okay. So, in this case, the key thing, I would say investor-owned utilities. Well, the first thing to understand about utilities is we economists often say that they are a natural monopoly. And here's the idea. So at my home, we'll have wires that bring me electricity. Okay. And there's one company that I pay to bring me electricity. Turns out there's only one company I have the choice of to get electricity. I guess I could try to run my own generator. There may be environmental laws against that. So as far as I'm aware, there's only one company. I think it's Dominion Energy, and this is the only one that I'm allowed to use. And so therefore, to me, this company is a monopoly. And the reason we say it's a natural monopoly, because you could think, well, there could be competition. What if there were another electric company that was going to compete? Now, if they were going to do that, that other company would have to run its own electric wires to my house. So if I had 2 companies competing, I have to have 2 sets of wires coming to my house. And you think that's pretty inefficient. You double the cost of the infrastructure for electricity. You have to have double 2 sets of wires to every house, and 3 if you wanted 3 companies competing, and so on. So because of these costs are duplicated, and these are fixed costs, by the way, it's most efficient if it's lowest cost if there's only one company. We only have one set of wires. So you think that the efficient outcome is for there only to be one company, and so we say that's the case of a natural monopoly. The most efficient setup would be when there's only one company. So when that happens, and if there's only one company, the investor-owned utility has the incentive to try to get price as high as they can. Okay, now a state-owned utility, the government-owned utility, would have governments regulating them, and they may want to follow what the wishes of the voters are, and they don't have as much incentive to have high prices. Okay, so that's a big reason why most cities and most states, they are not privately run, or if they are, there's one privately run company that is heavily regulated. Um, so in lots of cases, it's government run, and the reason why is because there's a monopoly, a natural monopoly, and if there's a monopoly, that's a market failure, as we said. So that's why you may see that. Now, on the other hand, it asks what are the incentives of that. Now, if it's government run, now if it's, well, let's take it back. If it's privately run, there's some investor who's making money from profits. That investor, one, has an incentive to get prices as high as he or she can get them, but also wants costs as low as he or she can get them. In a government run utility, we say the incentives to lower the costs are not as much. And think about it. If you're running this electric company, and suppose that there's some no work job that you've hired your brother-in-law for, you think, well, I could lower my costs by firing my brother-in-law at doing this job that no one needs. On the other hand, what does it matter? I get the same pay. We get the same, this is set, the amount of money we get is set by government anyway. What does it matter if we lower our costs? So for that reason, in general, the government-run utilities don't have the same incentive to lower their costs. Okay, number B. Okay, state colleges versus private colleges. Okay, so similar things happen with state colleges versus private colleges. I'd say part of the problem, private colleges, they're almost always nonprofits. There's very few colleges run for profit nowadays. So as a result, but in general, I think there's a little bit more incentive for the privately run universities to lower their costs. I can tell you this: I used to teach at Stanford University. I left Stanford to go to UCLA, and around that time, when this happened, a recession hit, and sure enough, Stanford got rid of some of the staff positions that were actually pretty useless. There were a lot of staff positions where you just weren't needed. You could have gotten rid of that staff and it would not have affected the quality of the education. Stanford did a big purge. UCLA did not. So UCLA, I think, they're government run, and it really doesn't matter if their costs go up. They can just ask the government for more money. So that's one difference. It's kind of similar to these utility companies. The other thing is the profits. The private companies, the private universities probably have a little more incentive to raise their prices, their tuition, than probably the state-run universities. And you generally see that. The private universities have higher tuitions than the state colleges. The other thing that I want you to notice, though, is that when you have cases of for instance, who do you admit? Which students do you admit? At the privately run universities, generally, both on both sides, at least the elite schools on both sides, the elite private institutions and the elite state colleges, they both want to get the best students that they can. However, sometimes they cheat on that. And one thing the private colleges will do very often, they'll allow legacies. So those are people who are alumni, they're children of alumni, and usually when they say legacy, they mean not just children of alumni, but children of alumni who have been donating to the university. And those kids have a little bit of a leg up. It's a little bit easier for them to get into the college than the other kids. As far as I've seen, I'm not aware of any state college that does the same thing. State colleges usually they're prohibited by law. You cannot give any sort of advantage to alumni at a state college. Now, on the other hand, one thing that has happened, and I'd heard stories of this when I was at UCLA. I haven't heard any stories of this at George Mason, but at UCLA, that if you were the child of a state legislator, Okay, there's one time even the president of UCLA or the chancellor basically admitted it to the LA Times. Yeah, of course we give preferential treatment to children of state legislators, and he said something like they're controlling $1 billion of a budget. Of course, I'm going to give a leg up if some kid of a state legislator is going to apply. Okay, and this is recently there's some audit of the University of California system. There are several cases of this. I'm not aware of private colleges that give special benefits to children of the politicians. Okay, so those are the differences between state colleges and private colleges. Okay, that was 3. Okay, question 8. Okay. Okay, a growing number of Americans are currently living in tightly controlled communities of condominiums, co-ops, or even single-family homes. These communities are usually governed by an elected association of homeowners that establish and enforce rules designed to protect property values. Some students of such residential communities argue that because they are private governments with the power to collect taxes, provide services, regulate behavior, they should be subject to the Constitution's restraints on government action. Question A. Do the governors of such associations use coercion, or do they use persuasion to induce residents not to post signs, erect satellite dish antennas, park pickup trucks, or neglect their lawns and gardens? Okay. So part of this is there's notions of homeowners associations, and so I've now lived in 3 different places where I owned my home. Actually, 2 of the 3 had a homeowner association, which means this is when when the house I currently live in, when I bought this house, my wife and I bought it, we were required. We had to sign the set of agreement, a list of rules that the homeowner association had, and it included things like we can't paint our house neon green or pink, or there's certain colors that we can use to paint the house. We must maintain our lawn, and there are other things like we can't put yard signs, and including like when we want to sell our house, we can't put a yard sign for political candidates. We signed an agreement, so these rules are governing our house. Now, I've noticed there's lots of strong libertarians who are fine with these type of things. So this is, it's a voluntary agreement. Everyone there has voluntarily agreed to this set of rules, but meanwhile, some of the very ardent libertarians are against any kind of coercion at all, and they don't like governments when the governments write these rules like this, and they say this is coercion when the government does it, but they won't say it's coercion when the homeowners association does it. I think what the authors of your textbook were getting at, it's not so clear the difference in these, and I'm with that view. So the question was, the governors, do they use coercion or persuasion to induce residents? Okay. I've probably lived in a house that governed by one of these associations 10 years of my life, at least 5. Out of those, both places where I live would have an annual meeting where everyone who was part of the homeowners association, everyone who owned a home, and this was invited to the meeting, and we could discuss. There was a board. We liked board members. Only one time did I actually go to one of these meetings, and I talked to the president and I learned about these things. So I asked, now what happens? Can they use coercion? And so I asked the president of the board, what if I put up a yard sign? And I said, what would happen? I said, well, the board would write you a letter and say, no, you're not supposed to do that. And then what if I said, no, I'm going to keep on doing it? I said, well, we would write you another letter. And I said, what if I kept on continuing to refuse to abide by what the board tells me? I said, well, eventually we can sell your house. We can force you to leave your home, and you signed a contract. We have the right to call the police, and we can force you from your home. So it starts off with persuasion, but in the end, this is just like these safety stickers that you have to put on your car. The government, or in this case the homeowners association, they start off with persuasion, but this is backed up by force. And the contract that I have signed and other uh, homeowners that members of these homeowner associations have signed allows someone like the board to use force to do this. So I would argue it's something like a city government, actually, these homeowners association. You could say, even though I voluntarily assigned it, they still can use force. Um, Okay, question B. Okay, I'll just read it. The defenders of such associations argue that compliance with the rules is voluntary because residents consent to obey the rules before they purchase. Okay, that's what happened with me. Do you agree? Okay, yes. If the governing association, except, I mean, there's some exceptions to that. So the first one I lived in, my wife and I joined. We signed the agreement, and then our daughter was born. Our daughter came into this homeowner association. She never signed the agreement. Okay, all of a sudden she is in the association, not quite voluntarily. I guess her parents forced her into it, but has to abide by these laws, even though she never signed this agreement. Okay. What if the governing association enacts a new rule to which a particular homeowner strongly objects? Is that homeowner's compliance still voluntary? Okay, let me tell you something. So I've done past research on political science, and in fact, this first homeowner association I lived in, the president said, we want to change the rules. We want to change those set of rules that we have. And Tim, would you write up will it be willing to write up a rough draft of new rules? I thought, I'm going to be the James Madison of the Homeowners Association. I'm going to write up the draft which we vote on. And I said, now, if we do this, will the homeowners, will they be subject, do they have to abide by these? He said, oh, yeah. You look at the thing that they signed, there's a clause in there that says we can change these by these set of rules. I can't remember if it was something like a 2/3 vote of the board, or maybe it was a 2/3 vote of the board plus a 1/2 vote of all the homeowners. But there was a set of ways that we could change the rules, and the people who lived in the homeowners association, they agreed to that they would be governed by the new rules if they were if the rules were changed in such a way. So the answer to this. What is it? Is it still voluntary? Well, it kind of is, because when you signed the document, you agreed that you would abide by any of these changes in the rules. Okay. Now, you could say, no, what? But the same thing happens with a city government. If I live in a city, the city, if they changes the rules, you could argue that that's just as voluntary as the homeowners associations. I think it's actually a problem that any of these ardent libertarians have to face. Okay, so that was question 8, and let me do one more. Sorry, this part's going to go a little bit long. So number 10. Okay. Adam Smith assigned to the sovereign or commonwealth, okay, it means the government or the nation, the duty of erecting and maintaining those public institutions and those public works which, okay, Adam Smith must have been writing this. This is in the old days they wrote in these really long sentences. Okay, those public works which, though they may be in the highest degree advantageous to a great society, are, however, of such a nature that the profit could never repay the expense to any individual or small number of individuals, in which it therefore cannot be expected that any individual or small number of individuals should erect or maintain. Okay, it's basically saying it's a public good. I think that's what he was saying. Okay, and so, and by the way, so this explanation, again, some very ardent libertarians will often justify their libertarianism. In fact, some very radical libertarians or almost anarchists will use Adam Smith to justify their beliefs, but Adam Smith was not one of them. Adam Smith definitely believed in at least some forms, a limited form of government. He would not be in that camp of those type of very radical libertarians. Okay, let's discuss what are some of the government that Smith would be in favor of for. So this is B. Smith discusses 4 public institutions for public works, or works that at least partially justify his criterion. And those were, she said, 1 for the defense of the society, so Smith's words, defense of the society, that's 1. Number 2, he said 4, the administration of justice. Okay, let me say, the we'll call it the particular example, or what we would call such a case for the current U.S. system. So this is military. He just means defense. He just means the military. He might have meant also police. He said the administration of justice. What he means here are the courts. Government would pay judges' salaries. I think he also might mean police here. Number 3, Smith says for facilitating commerce. Okay, and for this one, if you read Adam Smith, when he says this, he includes roads, bridges, also things like administration of weights and measures. So if you might ask, how much is a kilogram? Well, if it was up to each different store owner to decide what a kilogram is or what a pound is, they might start chipping off their weights, and they might make it smaller than other people would say. And no shop owner could agree exactly what a kilogram or a pound means. So Smith says you might want someone in the government, one central office, to say, here is an example. This lead weight, this is what we're defining as a pound. Okay. So facilitating commerce, and then number 4, he said facilitating for society, for those promoting instruction of the people. Yeah, I think he meant I'll call it the schools. So there's a number of things that Smith would be in favor of. So he's definitely in favor of the government providing roads, government providing schools. Some on the very radical side of libertarians are not in favor of the government doing this, but Smith clearly was. The question asks, though, is there any major duty of government that Smith overlooks? Okay. I would argue that if those are the only things, that's the only things that Smith mentions that government should do, education, just call it schools, I would say something like half of the U.S. government would disappear if it were up to Adam Smith. Something like half of the cabinet secretaries would also disappear. So the big chunks of what the U.S. federal government does, the biggest expense is Medicare. Probably next biggest is Social Security, Medicaid. Those 3 things Adam Smith did not talk about. Those are mainly just transfers of government giving checks from one person to another. That was not a part of Smith's vision of government. Things like the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, which, as we talked about, in the text, those often just regulate voluntary transactions between two people. It's not clear Smith would have any part of that. Post office, he would privatize that. National parks, it's not clear that Smith would have those. So I would argue something like half of the cabinet secretaries would not be, they would disappear if Smith had his way, and I bet something like half of the budget of the federal government would disappear. Okay, so that is number 11. That is part C. C and part D, I will do 3 more questions.